As dozens of cases covered on this very channel show, not everyone who vanishes for a long time meets with foul play. Some escape to a new life, while others simply run away from feelings of guilt, shame, or failure. Statistically, most people who go missing are found within days, if not hours, but the cases we'll be exploring today are unfortunately the outliers. Join us for today's episode as we examine 3 cases of famous people who are still missing today. Levi Davis. Born March 12, 1998 in Birmingham, England, Levi Davis was best known as a professional rugby player with the Worthing Raiders, where he played as a winger. He made his debut for Bath in 2017 before siding with the Ealing Trailfinders. He eventually joined the Worthing Raiders in the autumn of 2021. As well as being a professional sportsman, Levi was known for participating in the X Factor Celebrity in 2019, where he and several other rugby players performed as part of a group named TriStar, where they ranked 5th place in the competition. The following year, he participated in the reality show Celebs Go Dating, having recently opened up about being bisexual. He released his first song, With Me, in September of 2022. By all accounts, Levi was a busy man with lots of interests he wished to pursue, and it was clear to most that his career was only just beginning. But before he could truly find his footing in the world of music and celebrity, he disappeared. 24-year-old Levi was last seen on October 29, 2022, after leaving Ibiza, where he had been working on music and heading for Barcelona in mainland Spain by boat. CCTV showed him exiting the old Irish pub on La Rambla at around 10 p.m. that night, with the staff reporting that he'd only had a few drinks before leaving. He also called his mother to let her know he'd arrived in the city, but he was out of money and he needed a loan of £30 to cover his hotel for the night. His mother, Julie, recalled reprimanding him for not saving enough for the trip, telling the media he phoned and said, "Mum, can you send £30? But I said, look, Levi, you know I've been supporting you more than enough over the past number of months. You've got to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. When she tried to contact him later on, she heard nothing back. He was last heard from in the small hours of October 30th, when he sent a voice note on WhatsApp to some of his friends. Julie added that Levi had started traveling after receiving a severe knee injury that left him unable to continue his rugby career. However, he was interested in pursuing music and had been doing so since receiving the bad news about his injury. The morning after he was last seen, passengers on a cruise ship close to Barcelona's port observed a man in the water. Although it was dark, they managed to pick out his white t-shirt and believed he was a dark-skinned man in his 30s. Though Spanish police initiated a search, he was never found. Investigators have suggested that the man was Levi, as there was nobody on board the cruise ship unaccounted for. They theorized that the man drowned. Notably, in the days following his disappearance, authorities discovered that Levi's phone pinged by an underground station near the port at around 6:30 a.m., while his passport was found a week later in the cargo area of the port. His bank account has not been accessed since he went missing. Julie, however, suspects that there is more to the disappearance. 2 journalists at the independent publication Byline Times have suggested that the Barcelona police bungled the investigation by not recovering all the CCTV footage and failing to check out Levi's full communications history, among other things. They have also suggested that the 24-year-old was being blackmailed shortly before he went missing. They alleged that he'd fallen victim to a scheme in which he was set up in a sexual situation while under the influence of drugs, sexually assaulted, and that it had been recorded so it could be used to extort money from him. Levi eventually confessed what had happened to several close friends and his mother. The investigation into Levi's disappearance is being led by Spanish authorities with support from the UK, but Julie has expressed her desire to see some movement in the case and thinks that the British police need to do more. She has stated, "I don't know if my son is dead or alive. He's my baby and he's very vulnerable, and I just want him home." Amelia Zelko. The name Amelia Zelko might not be familiar today, but back in the 1950s, Amelia represented what criminals despised: honesty, integrity, and strength. She was known as a clever and no-nonsense reporter, often writing articles about the seedy underbelly of the Illinois criminal and political world, and covering the likes of corruption, gangsters, and gambling. Her strong stances and unmovable moral compass led Joliet citizens to respect her. She was so well known and admired that she was often referred to by her first name alone when discussed. Amelia was last seen in Joliet, Illinois on September 25, 1957. The 47-year-old was working as a reporter for the Joliet Spectator, a weekly paper, at the time of her disappearance, but she was also the outlet's secretary and treasurer, business manager, and co-owner. By all accounts, she was a confident woman and well established. Colleagues saw her on the night of September 25th leaving the paper's office, where she'd been working on a story for the following day. She had been in good spirits at the time of her exit, and nobody suspected that it would be the last time that anyone saw her. When she failed to show up to work the next morning, her managing editor contacted the police. Over at her home, which was just a 3-minute drive from the office, investigators found that her car was parked out the front and the keys had been left beneath the front seat where they were normally kept. When canvassing the area and looking for witnesses, neighbors revealed to authorities that they had heard screaming and a car fleeing at high speed sometime between 12 and 12:15 a.m., but that they hadn't reported it as teenagers were often in the area creating noise and chaos. The only other sign that Amelia had made it back home that night was the discovery of her shoes. One was on the ground nearby, the other on the trunk of her car. Reportedly, it had been placed there by a passerby who had found it on the ground. According to friends and colleagues, Amelia had mentioned before that if she was ever in danger, she would take off her shoes and run as fast as she could. Notably, none of her other belongings were recovered at the scene. She was known to have been carrying a handbag when she left the office, but it was never found, nor were any of its contents. There were no indications inside the home that a struggle had taken place, suggesting that she'd been attacked outside upon arrival. Adding to this idea was the lack of evidence that she had spent the night inside the house. The main theory in Amelia's case is that she became the victim of foul play due to her work. This suggestion did not come out of the blue either, as police learned that the paper's publisher, William McCabe, who had known Amelia since she was 17, had almost been beaten to death by 2 unidentified men 9 years earlier. The men had used baseball bats in the attack and left him for dead. He was found by a farmer, having suffered a concussion, a broken arm, 2 broken legs, and various internal injuries. Furthermore, his office was ransacked at the time, leading to the idea that he'd been assaulted in connection with his work. Though no charges were filed, William and Amelia shared the belief that this attack had come from a result of the newspaper's anti-gambling stance. This wasn't the first time the paper had been met with violence. It was a near-regular occurrence for bricks to be thrown through the windows and for shots to be fired at the building. Amelia was known to have kept a locked box of secret files, some of which had been stolen during a break-in several years earlier. Once, she even contacted her brother, Joseph, to tell him that she felt unsafe walking to her car at night, as she was concerned that someone was following her. Joseph subsequently turned up in his own vehicle, armed with a shotgun, and Amelia was able to get to her car without incident. William McCabe died less than a year after Amelia vanished. It was not a suspicious death, and was a long time coming. He had been in and out of hospital for the last decade. William's daughters ordered that an audit be carried out shortly afterwards, but it was revealed that Amelia was a very capable bookkeeper and nothing was out of place. Authorities investigated other leads, but their efforts were fruitless, and the newspaper went under in 1965, having run for almost 40 years. Several pieces of information came to light decades after Amelia went missing. The first was from a bartender who saw her on the night of her disappearance. He claimed that she stopped in for a drink on her way home and that she made 2 long-distance calls from a public phone booth. The bartender only came forward in 1978. Similarly, that same year, a witness claimed to have seen 4 men with a dark-colored vehicle burying a woman's body near the bottom of an open storm sewer ditch, not far from Amelia's home. The witness alleged that this took place on the night of the disappearance. The report has never been verified, and it's unclear why either witness waited so long to come forward. Amelia's case is still unsolved, and foul play is still suspected. The FBI investigated the disappearance at one point, and while they were unable to rule out the possibility that the 47-year-old had vanished voluntarily, they also noted that local police seemed reluctant to interview prominent criminals she may have had issues with in connection with her case. Amelia was declared legally dead in 1964. She was last seen on September 25, 1957, in Joliet, Illinois. She is described as a white woman with dark brown hair and brown eyes. She stood between 5'4" and 5'6" tall and weighed 118 pounds when she was last seen. She also used the nickname Molly. If you have any information about her disappearance, you can contact the Joliet Police Department at 815-724-3020. Joseph Force Crater. Joseph Force Crater was born in Easton, Pennsylvania on January 5, 1889. The oldest of 4 children, he attended Columbia University, where he obtained a law degree and met his wife, Stella Wheeler, whom he helped divorce from her current husband. The pair tied the knot in the spring of 1917. After leaving school, Joseph worked his way up from a clerk to a successful lawyer. His connections from university and those he made through his work allowed him to link further with the upper echelons of New York City society. His colleagues called him Good Time Joe, as he was always keen to enjoy the city's nightlife and spend his evenings drinking and dancing. In April of 1930, Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt appointed Joseph as Justice of the New York Supreme Court in New York County, but all was not as it seemed. Joseph Crater had already started to earn himself a bit of a shady reputation. Because he was appointed over an official candidate put forward by the political organization Tammany Hall, many began to suspect that he had paid off prominent figures of the group in order to boost his own career. Later, it would be noted that he had liquidated investments worth $16,000 and withdrawn about $7,000 from his bank account that spring. This sum of money equates to over $350,000 today, and it has been suggested that the cash was used to pay off the Tammany Hall bosses. In the summer of 1930, 41-year-old Joseph and his wife Stella were holidaying in Belgrade, Maine. They decided to take a break following the beginning of an anti-corruption inquiry, and in late July, he received a phone call. He would later tell his wife nothing about the contents of the conversation, other than that he was returning to NYC to straighten those fellows out. The following day, he arrived back at Greenwich Village, where his apartment was located. However, he never met with any of his colleagues or with those making the anti-corruption inquiries. Instead, he met a showgirl named Sally Lou Ritz, with whom he went to Atlantic City, New Jersey. Joseph returned to Maine on August 1st, but 2 days later, he traveled yet again to NYC, promising Stella that he would return for her birthday on August 9th. However, she never saw him again. She later told police that her husband was in good spirits when he left, and that nothing seemed amiss. On August 6th, Joseph visited his chambers, where he spent around 2 hours going through his files. He even destroyed several documents. He had a law clerk cash 2 checks for him, which amounted to over $79,000 in today's money. Along with the law clerk, Joseph Mara, he subsequently carried 2 secure briefcases to his apartment, where he instructed the clerk to take the rest of the day off. Later that day, he reserved a seat for a Broadway show at the Belasco Theater, despite having already seen the show previously, and he then ate dinner with Sally Lou Ritz and his friend, William Klein, a fellow lawyer. Later on, both parties would give differing accounts of Joseph's exit from the restaurant. Klein claimed that he entered a taxi outside the restaurant at 9:30 p.m. and that the cab drove west on 45th Street. Ruesch initially agreed, but both individuals changed their story at some point, claiming that Joseph had not, in fact, entered a cab, but that he'd walked down the street, presumably to the theatre, to enjoy the show he'd booked tickets for. Joseph was not immediately noted to be missing. It wasn't until he missed his return to Maine that his wife reached out to friends and colleagues in New York, looking for any sign of him. His fellow justices also grew concerned when he failed to appear for the opening of the courts on August 25th, and though a small, private investigation was started at their behest, no useful leads were uncovered. The police were finally notified of the disappearance on September 3rd, and the press caught wind shortly afterwards, at which time they began printing the story on the front pages, prompting it to become national news. An extensive manhunt ensued in the following weeks, and a note was made of Joseph's rather suspicious behavior before he disappeared. There was much media speculation that he'd fled the country with a mistress in order to avoid punishment for wrongdoings linked to the anti-corruption inquiry, but there were also suggestions that he'd met with foul play to keep him quiet. His story became so famous and talked about that eventually the public began referring to going AWOL as pulling a crater. Comedians also took advantage of the case, many beginning to use the line, "Judge Crater, call your office," in their routines. Shortly after the investigation began, detectives uncovered that Joseph's safety deposit box had been emptied and that the 2 suitcases dropped off at his home with the help of law clerk Joseph Mara were missing from the apartment. In the following days, now that the news of the disappearance had broken, the police became inundated with tips and supposed leads that Joseph had been sighted in other parts of the country. In October of 1930, a grand jury convened and involved 95 witnesses and 975 pages of testimony. Stella refused to appear, though it's unclear why. The jury ultimately declared that the evidence was insufficient to determine what exactly had happened to Joseph Carter on the day he went missing. Notably, Joseph's relationship with Sally Lou Ruesch was not the first extramarital affair he had, nor was she the first showgirl that he'd entertained. For several years, his reputation had been plagued by the idea that he had a fondness for such girls, and that he socialized with many of them. He had a long-term mistress named Connie Marcus alongside Ruesch. Interestingly, Ruesch left the state just a few weeks after Crater was last seen. She was discovered in September of 1930 in Youngstown, Ohio, where she was living with her parents. She claimed that she had left New York to care for her ailing father. Still, police interviewed her multiple times over the years, including in 1937, when she was living in LA. Another showgirl, named June Bryce, was also believed to have seen Joseph on the day before he went missing. Stella's lawyer alleged that Bryce had been at the center of a blackmail scheme, which had also involved her boyfriend. The pair had supposedly extorted Joseph, and that was why he'd withdrawn large sums of money the day before he vanished. The lawyer added that Bryce's boyfriend was responsible for the disappearance and had killed Carter. Bryce ultimately disappeared some time before the grand jury convened. She was not located until 1948, by which time she was in a psychiatric hospital. Another woman linked tentatively to the judge was Vivian Gordon, a high-end sex worker with ties to a woman named Madame Polly Adler, whose job involved procuring sex workers for high-paying clients. Gordon was said to have had many high-profile clients, including politicians, policemen, and businessmen, and she also had links to Jack Legs Diamond, an NYC bootlegger and gangster who was said to socialize from time to time with Joseph Crater. Notably, Gordon had come to the public's attention following her death. She was murdered on February 25, 1931, after offering to testify about police corruption because she'd been falsely convicted of a crime she didn't commit, causing her to lose custody of her teenage daughter. The murky circumstances and obvious violence around her death led the public to speculate that her murder was connected to the disappearance of Joseph. Rumors swirled that a little red notebook had been found in Gordon's home, implicating high-powered men in schemes of corruption and naming them as regular clients. However, no such notebook had ever been recovered. Still, there was much fallout from Gordon's death. The policeman accused of framing her ultimately resigned from the force, and Mayor Jimmy Walker was also forced to resign. The hold Tammany Hall had over the city was finally dissolved, and, most tragically of all, Gordon's teen daughter took her own life. 6 months after Joseph vanished, in January of 1931, Stella discovered envelopes containing all sorts of documentation such as checks, stocks and bonds, along with a note, although the contents of the note are unknown. The envelopes had been discovered in a drawer in the home that had previously been searched, and although new leads emerged from this evidence, they quickly died out. Stella had Crater declared dead in absentia in 1939, shortly after remarrying, and the investigation into his disappearance was officially closed 40 years later in 1979. In 2005, police revealed that a woman had died at the age of 91, leaving behind notes in which she claimed that she knew the identity of Joseph Crater's killer. The woman stated that her husband, NYPD Detective Robert Good, had learned that the murderer was another NYPD officer named Charles Burns, who also worked as a bodyguard for Jewish mobster and hitman Abraham Kid Twist Rels. Joseph was allegedly buried near West 8th Street in Coney Island, Brooklyn, where the New York Aquarium currently sits, though the site was excavated in 1950 and there were no indications that it contained human remains. The technology at the time may not have been advanced enough to reveal a body. Journalists who've extensively covered the case have expressed their skepticism of the elderly woman's account, however. The whereabouts of Joseph Carter remain unknown, and he is still referred to today as, quote, the missingest man in America. And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment down below with your own theories and speculations, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.